Welcome to the Independent Producers Organization program. This is the program that showcases independent producers, their productions, and provides a forum for discussing issues which affect independent television producers here in the Pacific Northwest.
All right, welcome to the Independent Producers Organization live showcase. We are on once a month on the second Wednesday of the month from 7 to 9. We have 2 hours that we spotlight different issues, community organizing, and sometimes national, international issues as well. We have 3 guests lined up. We have a 15-minute one here, or maybe a little longer, as soon as our second guest shows up. And the second guest is, who is it going to be now?
Stacey Overman.
Stacey Overman, right. And she's supposed to be coming on. And then we have 2 Republican candidates.
Right.
For the second hour.
Right.
All right, and
Okay.
we'll get to that a little bit later. I was talking here with Richard Carpenter, who's also a producer here as well. My name is Jim Lockhart. And then we have Trudy Cooper with us. And she is with an organization called Oregonians for Drone Control. And not too long ago, we had Frank Mahoney on, and he showed his little drone and how much fun it could be, and it could take video and all that. And that's all very well and good. But there's another side to that, and we discussed that briefly that night. But we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the other side of what drones are all about. And we know a little bit about it from the news. And we're going to also talk a little bit about this community forum that's coming up next month, August 7th at the First Unitarian Church. But first, welcome to the program, Trudy.
Thank you.
All right, I've seen you out there at many different events. I know that you are an activist and for many causes. But I'm curious why you've chosen this cause. Not that it's the only one that is important to you.
Well, initially I got really concerned about drones because I'd been watching on the news a lot drones in military use, and I was very disturbed about the secrecy of the program. Even though it was secret, everybody knew that there were targeted killings, basically assassination drones, in Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, and other places, now Iraq, obviously. And so I went with Medea Benjamin, who wrote the book, Drone Warfare: Killing by Remote Control. And I got very motivated from hearing her speak and went to Pakistan with her and with Colonel Ann Wright, who is actually one of the speakers for our upcoming drone panel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can understand why it would be an issue with anybody. Did you have a question there?
No, you went to Pakistan and just
we went
check on all this?
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, we went to Waziristan, which is where the most of the drone bombing had happened, and there were a significant number of drone strikes during the period, particularly after Obama came into office, which was kind of surprising to people because people thought that Obama was not going to be that kind of president necessarily.
Yeah, fool me once, shame on you.
Both sides have drones, using them against each other, right?
Well, no.
Not really.
Yeah.
We are not at war with Pakistan. So
Right,
the
right.
notion was that the Taliban, and supposedly Al-Qaeda, who was in fighting our soldiers in Afghanistan, were harbored or sheltered by the Pashtun people in Waziristan because the Taliban are primarily Pashtun. So the notion was that you just go in and bomb areas, drone bomb areas in Pakistan. It turns out the most people killed were civilians. And so we met with the families and talked with them, and we met with the human rights attorneys, and we met with a lot of people there who were working on the international issue of drones, and the people that we met with were determined to prove that it was a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty and was not legal for the United States to just be going into another country and killing people, particularly with the really high rate of civilian casualties.
Now you're talking about airspace, right?
Yeah.
People coming in through, that would be a legal thing against the law of that country.
Unless they
Yeah.
they gave the okay. Did
Right.
they give the
They-
okay as
not
a blanket,
of-
or for each individual one, or?
No, Pakistan made a big show of saying this is a violation of our sovereignty, it has to stop, and it would just plain never stop. And so we wanted to go over there to meet with Richard Hoagland, who was the sort of stand-in ambassador at the time. And it was really startling because he couldn't even answer any of our questions.
Oh.
He seemed unaware of the program, of what drones were doing. He said, we think no civilians have been killed. You know, it was absurd. But our goal, because at that time, that was 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago, it was a year and a half ago, I guess. And at that time, there was almost nothing in the mainstream media about drones. And then there was just an explosion of
Right.
of activity and attention, and we didn't even know when we went there if the media was going to show up. But CNN showed up, ABC showed up, all of the main news channels showed up, and some of them did a really excellent job of covering it. So it's become an international movement to try to get transparency around the issue of drones and their use in war, because the civilian casualties are so high and because it's such a violation of sovereignty of these nations.
Yeah.
So you're talking about Yemen and all these different countries that we're doing this. They're not giving us the okay in any of them. Then.
Well, Yemen now is the current president and actually the previous president. But there's huge resistance among the population, and so they are motivated to protest their own government in their own government's sanctioning of the use of drones and trying to use the drones themselves to deal with the security issues in their own countries.
So is the media covering is the present media covering the situation in these other countries that the populations are opposed to this? Or are they just talking about it from the government standpoint?
No, you know, most of the news stories that you see say 5 suspected militants killed in a drone strike as their convoy was moving through, and then they named the area. And there's no independent verification usually that is reported. So we were relying on independent, like the Bureau of Investigative Journalism that works out of the UK. We were relying on alternative sources of information because the government still hasn't released any names of the thousands of people who have been killed by drone strikes,
Wow.
and has not revealed any of what they assume is the legal rationale for this kind of strike.
How much is the United States government admitted to the collateral damage, as they call it, the euphemism?
Oh, very little.
Very little.
Very little. What they did was they classified any male over the age of, I think it was 14, 15, 16, as being enemy combatant. So once you were dead, that was enough proof that you were an enemy combatant. So the absurdity of that is that, let's say a house gets struck and there's a mother and a father and a son and a daughter, and the father and the son are going to be classed as enemy combatants, and the other 2 are going to be classed as civilians. And it's just arbitrary. And a lot of the people who we talked to whose homes had been struck, they had no idea how they ended up being targeted. They had no idea. They assumed that it was a similar situation to in Iraq, where they had the bounty programs and people ended up in
Snitch 'em off.
people ended
Yeah.
up in Guantanamo who were completely innocent based on just somebody needed to make $6,000. That's a lot of money where they were.
So they were pissed off at him, and they would just
Yeah.
get him out of the country.
Yeah, so that's what the theory was of the people that we met with. They said one man in particular, Kareem Khan, he is working very close. He had a lawsuit against the U.S. government, against the CIA, for killing his son and his brother. And he had no idea why he was targeted. He was a journalist for Al Jazeera. He, had no ties to any kind of militancy, and that's the story of so many people that we spoke with.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen that video that Chelsea Manning released that showed the collateral damage where those 3 journalists were just
Yes.
mowed down by a helicopter.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't like this is a rare occurrence.
Yeah. So that's the military side of drones, which is really not what Oregonians for Drone Control is about. But you were asking me how I got into this. But
Well, that would get you going.
Yeah, the domestic side of drones is really interesting because the drone industry doesn't want to use the word drone. The word drone seems to imply everything we just talked about.
Something to do with bees.
And so you don't want to have that association of assassination when you're trying to develop these applications for precision agriculture and forestry and fighting wildfires. At the same time, it is the case that these companies are also making drones that they sell to the military. So, for example, In Situ, which is in Portland, I think the office is in Portland, and then they do the manufacturing in Bingen across the river. I think it's the Scan Eagle and the Integrator, I don't know what the names are of these, but they are military drones. So In Situ also is creating applications that are peaceful drones. So, but the point is they're equipped the same. They're either armed or they're not armed. But and some of them can be, as you've probably seen, they're small enough to fit on your finger. Like an enormous mosquito, so it's about that big. So we have some pictures of, people holding a little drone like that. And the drone that was outside of you saw that news story about the woman in Seattle who saw a drone hovering outside of her window.
Right.
Yeah, and she used the word hovering and she used the word return, that suggests, and she took a picture of it, so it left and came back, and then she was able to snap a picture of it. So she was very upset about that, and it turned out that it was a Portland resident and business owner who owned that drone, and he has a company called, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled Sky, SKYRIS Imaging, and they do aerial mapping for construction companies, developers, and so on, and probably a lot of other applications.
It's probably Sky Resolution.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Something like that.
There's a lot of very useful things that can be done with these, but it occurs to me that the only difference between a regular drone and the military drone would be the arms that are put on it.
Well,
the weaponry.
the simplest way to define what a drone is that it's a camera that flies. There can be a lot of other things that are going on with it. It can have video capacity, it can have microphone capacity. So the interesting thing is that in recent years, in addition to this growth industry, this sort of pro-drone growth industry, there's also been people who are developing technology that is anti-drone or drone detection technology.
Of course, yes.
And not just drone detection. At first, when I read the article, I was giving an interview and I said, well, we don't know that they're anti-drone, we just know that they're pro-detection. But then I read a little further, and they actually, I think they use the word neutralize. They have some kind of capability of interrupting the signal such that the camera, the microphone, and the video won't work.
It's like the science fiction movies where the flying saucer comes down and everybody's car stops, interferes somehow with the flow of electricity, and it would be very simple to do, much simpler to do that, I would think, with the drone, because I know they have this little battery-operated transmitter, and it would be pretty easy to jam that signal. And that's something I'd like to get back to too, but anti-drone tech. But I am curious about. It was a while back. I think it was on TV. There was some kind of law they were trying to get through the legislature down there in Salem to define this drone technology, and because some folks, and a lot of more Republicans, were concerned about privacy issues. And you know, this thing with this woman is a really very indicative of that issue. And is that anything that that the Oregonians for Drone Control are working on?
Right, that's really the main focus. Is the purpose of Oregonians for Drone Control is to assist the process of getting legislation enacted that will address the concerns about drones, so that we can ensure that citizens are protected, that their privacy rights are protected, that that drones are safe. Because for one thing, the FAA, which is the only body regulating drones now, technology always lags behind. I mean, policy always lags behind the rapid development of technology. And so while there were two bills that were introduced, the Senate Bill 71, and it failed. It got huge opposition
Is
from
this national or in Salem?
Oregon.
Oregon?
Yeah, it got a lot of opposition from the drone industry and from hobbyists, and so the effort then went into House Bill 2710, and that bill passed. But that bill only regulates public use of drones, and it doesn't even do that very well. And so one of our panelists will be talking about the legislation, the gaps, and what other kinds of legislation there is in the country, because everyone has been scrambling to try to, to structure the parameters within which all this happens, since the FAA has been charged by Congress to create guidelines by 2015, which is
It's coming up.
It's
pretty.
coming
Is
right
that,
up.
Is that like January 2015 or?
You know, I'm not sure.
or,
Actually, my impression
December?
is that it's summer. I don't know why, but right now there are. If you want to fly a drone, it has to be no higher than 400 feet. It has to be over your own property. If you want to fly differently than that, you have to get a special use permit. And so there have been a lot of special use permits is the issue as well. So
It's interesting because the fellow that came on, who was really avid, just playing with it, takes him to the park a lot, and so that would be technically against the law.
I think so. Yeah.
I
And in fact, well, technically against the FAA, but there is not any state legislation that provides any guidelines in terms of either commercial or individual citizen hobbyist use of drones. And so that's really very much needed. So our goal, it's kind of an ambitious goal what we're trying to do with this panel, because we're not just trying to bring into one room the people who already all agree with us, but are have these concerns, but are also trying to bring in people who may also have these concerns, but who are promoting drones either for individual use or for commercial use. So the panel not only includes Colonel Ann Wright, who, as I mentioned, went on the Pakistan trip with us. And she will be talking about her opposition to weaponized drones. Another one of the speakers, his name is Brian Whiteside, and he's a leader in the industry, and he's an official in the national and particularly the Northwest chapter of the, what's it called? That's not called drones. Unmanned aerial systems.
Close enough.
Yeah.
gives you an idea what it is anyway.
Right. So they don't want it to call drones, and I'm not doing very well at coming up with the phrase they prefer, because we all tend to call them drones, just colloquially.
Just like anything else, whoever is behind it is going to lobby for it, whether it's right or wrong.
Right, and there's
Always
certain
gets
right
me.
things about it, but there's something, if they don't want to address the downside of it, then that's just not right.
Well, I think that, whenever you have a vested interest, they're terrified that there's going to be some kind of legislation that is really going to hamper their industry.
It's like gun control.
Cause them to lose income. So they have that concern. So it's, again, interest group politics, and that's why it's so important that we analyze the policy issues, not just have an adversarial kind of situation where. So we're trying to bring people together who may have never talked to each other to talk with each other, to share their point of view, not in a debate or adversarial sort of way, but to share their thinking on what the guidelines should be, why they should be, what the public interest is in terms of drones, because the forces now in Oregon, sometimes it shocks me that the industry is so concerned, because Oregon is doing a lot to make this a growth industry in Oregon. There's been grants of, I think it was $882,000 for a 2-year grant.
Government grant?
Yeah, for a drone company in Oregon, and to develop their technology, and that money, that's already a lot of money, will be matched by the Innovation Fund, which is a private fund, and so the fundraising, matching funds are in the process of being raised for that.
$2 million,
And so those are state, the first one, the $882,000, that's state money. And so
It's
that
taxpayers'
decision,
money.
has been made to grow the drone industry in Oregon. And it is growing. It's growing a lot. There are a lot of companies in Oregon, and Clackamas Sheriff's Department has applied to the FAA to be able to use drones. We don't know what for.
I was going to bring
know
that up
what the-
eventually here.
Yeah, we don't know what the specifics of that are. The Forestry Department has purchased some drones recently and will use them to fight wildfires. It has been an enormous amount of public money that has been going to drones, and a large amount of encouragement of the drone industry at the state level.
And also probably R&D, research into.
Yes, and in cooperation with Oregon State University. That's
Because
part of it.
universities are going to get on that bandwagon right away.
Yeah.
Is the people for drones that make them, do they have written material? Or
Yes.
Is it website or?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Probably just
There's
drones.
just there's tons of material
Okay.
and websites and excited
That are pro,
hobbyists,
right.
people that are totally pro. It's huge.
Trying to think of some good uses.
There's a lot of good uses,
Fire
there-
control is a good one.
and there's some interesting
Yeah.
controversial uses. Like there are at least 3 universities that have drone journalism schools. That's exactly what they're called, drone journalism.
Drone
They aren't even
paparazzis.
using the euphemism of unmanned aerial
start on
systems.
it.
And their assumption is photography has always been, in public spaces, has always been an established right of journalism. So why wouldn't you just extend that to having drones? So there are a lot of interesting people on various sides of it, either as advocates or as opponents.
Well, we're basically just a whole new dimension for the paparazzi. They can fly over and get naked pictures of just about anybody now, and there's just nothing. You don't have to shoot to the bushes or anything.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing, because with the NSA revelations and people being concerned about their cell phones, their computers, and so on, it seems to me that people get a lot more agitated about the issue of a drone because it seems so much more personal and intrusive and real time than knowing that someone has metadata, or that somebody could possibly take something off of your cell phone at some point, or that they could possibly read your email, or even that they're gathering data off of Facebook, because it seems like it's right there with you, over your shoulder, possibly looking through your window. Recording a meeting that, so a lot of activists are concerned that there may be uses of drones for social control. And so another interesting thing is that one of the other panelists, his name is Peter Lumsdaine, and he's going to be talking about that, sort of
Yeah, they have the graphic up there.
the future of robotics. And he has an organization called Alliance for Resisting Drone Warfare and Social Control. And so it's going to be interesting. He's going to talk more about the sort of dystopian side of where are we headed with this, because one point that he makes is by the time you have regulated what you think is the existing technology, it's already light years ahead of
Right,
what you
right.
what you know about.
Well, I always figured that whatever technology we have, they probably have 2 or 3 behind that, and they're working on maybe a couple more that we don't even know about yet, and that's just that's just how it works. But you mentioned this whole privacy issue. Supreme Court actually just came in on the privacy of of a person's phone, because basically a lot of the things of what you just said about the drones. I mean, your telephones can have your medical information. It can have a whole lot of information on it that they cannot just grab that up and go into it without a search warrant. And so you're dealing with some of the same invasions of our privacy with this drone technology. And you mentioned, I forget, you just social control, and I was thinking more like spying and working against dissent, like the old COINTELPRO and all that.
Yeah.
That is something that I think that the people that were down in Salem, some of the ones that were concerned about that. And they're you got helicopters flying over your head. You got the cops there with the video cameras in your face on all these protests I've ever been to. And this is just this little thing up in the air. Doesn't matter how to make any noise at all. Who knows what they could be doing with that
just
information.
recently, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because just about 3 weeks ago, I think they were Israeli drones, and they were sold to mining companies in South Africa to do strike busting, to break up strikes. And
exactly what
they
I'm talking
are
about,
equipped,
yeah.
they're weaponized. They have rapid rounds of rubber bullets and pepper bullets, and 3 different kinds of things that, for
break up a crowd.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard about that. And I don't think I heard about it on the news anywhere.
A lot of things
so
we
that
probably won't hear.
Yeah, I was thinking as to specifically protest, but yeah, union organizing is another really good one. I mean, they can get they could have one flying around there to follow a person around. To just of course they could do that with a GPS now too as well. So the parameters around us are shrinking as far as our privacy, and privacy is one of the first our Bill of Rights that has pretty much gone away. When it gets to the point where what you're doing when you're not at work can be determined by your analysis, which is forced on you to have the job, your privacy's gone. And this is just another step down that same road.
Yeah.
And that's why real public policy, dialogue, and citizenship is so important, because what really needs to happen is for the public to be asking, what is it that drones should be doing that really matters, that can't be done by any other means, and that is in the public good, not just for the sake of doing it because we have the tool. And that's the case with any kind of technology. If the tool is there and people aren't restricted, that there aren't guidelines on how they're going to use it, there's going to be abuse. So
that's right.
Well, not only that, but I lost my train of thought there. I had 2 different things going in my head at once. But there could be dangers when you get a lot of these up there too.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about these the little ones, but there's different sizes of these too. I wish we had a chance to upload those pictures, because this one guy had a picture. You had a picture. That one guy had this big thing over his shoulder. That thing was to come down on somebody.
Yeah.
Or crash into another one, or go through a window, or so many things could happen with these things that we don't have issues with it now, but like all this Sputnik or whatever junk in space, that stuff could come down and hurt somebody. And their technology, they never think about that. It just seems to me that the technology we have compared to the technology that the military has. I mean, they're running these things from Nevada over to Pakistan, but the ones we have here, which is probably a lot of the R&D money, the ones that we have here might have 300-400 feet with the transmitter, and that's it. You can't go very far. And so, are you familiar with any of those statistics of?
Well, you mean the different kinds of drones and
Yeah,
what their
the drones that we have
capabilities
here,
are?
the capability, they can't make these distances yet, like the ones that the military are using. But that technology must be,
Oh, that technology is taking off, and they're getting not only smaller and smaller, but more and more capable. And it's the technology is developing really quickly, and the people on the panel will speak to that. There are at least 2 people on the panel who know a lot about the technology. So whatever questions people have about that, I think they're going to be able to get them answered.
Well, we've spoke about this event tangentially 3 or 4 times now, so maybe we ought to just directly go right into it, and this what this event is and when it is.
Okay. It's August 7th, which is a Thursday, and it will open the doors at 6:30, and there will be tabling from our various co-sponsors. I didn't bring the list of them, but one of them is KBOO, Alliance for Democracy, Progressive Party, Green Party, 18th Avenue Peace House, Veterans for Peace,
Oh, yes. Peace.
and there's others.
I'm sure there's a lot more, right? That would probably
And we
be
may
in-
gather others in the next 4 weeks before the panel. And it is a moderated panel, and we don't yet have confirmed the person who will be the knowledge. We know who we want, but I can't say who they are until we have
Until
them.
we have them or don't have
yeah,
them,
and the moderator also is a very prominent person in the community that everybody knows, and that I think, or the one that we hope we're going to have, that will be also a big draw. So that will create a little bit of mystery here, and then you can have me come back, and then I can tell you.
If you had a goal to do with this event, what would that goal be?
The goal is
Get a
to
dialogue going.
get dialogue going about public policy, because we
okay.
don't really see that in the media. We don't see that anywhere. We don't see people putting forth a viewpoint or discussing with each other, trying to understand each other's thinking, trying to address each other's objections and concerns. It's just more, there's these different camps of, the advocates and the I don't want to say opponents, because I think it's very mixed now. I think that people realize that there are productive ways to use drones, and that there are dangers and privacy issues associated with that, and that then there are also, with weaponized drones, really destructive ways to use drones, which is another entirely different realm. So we're talking the state level realm of legislation and regulation and community consciousness. And the goal is to create public policy analysis and thinking rather than just succumb to interest groups. Because if you have a more aware citizenry, then we will have a lot greater chance of creating legislation that makes sense, because it always takes public pressure to get these kinds of outcomes. You can't just expect that the legislators are going to do the right thing. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but that, with this legislation, the 2710, I think it was very well-meaning, but it has a lot of holes in it from the point of view of anybody who looks very closely at it.
Well, what you're saying is the government and industry are going to be drivers, but we have to have an equal amount of citizens driving this dialogue and this legislation.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have that component, we're going to have basically industry, because government is just another arm of the industry in a lot of ways, if not all, in every way. Quite often it is.
So we're really hoping for a pretty substantial turnout so that we can keep that conversation going. And we're in this for the long haul. It's not as if, when you were saying that there can be accidents, unforeseen things. We don't know what might happen as with the technology developing as rapidly as it has, and with every other technology, whether it's automobiles or airplanes, there were not regulations until there were major disasters. So, it's kind of an embarrassing thing about humans that, and, there seems to be very little of forethought about what the consequences might be, because the short-term motivations and gain are so compelling. So
Sure. The automobile is a good example.
yeah, and I'm sure that there, of course, there were people at that time who were saying, let's think this through, but it didn't happen. There weren't laws about, and for example, the FAA didn't even exist until I think it was the late 50s, and airplanes have been around a whole lot longer than that.
At least, 30
And there were
years?
airline disasters.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there was someone that was saying, that car just ran over my dog. We need to talk about this. Just little things like that right on up. I mean, the technology is it's always going to be ahead of policy and of public awareness, in spite of our media that wants to talk nonstop about things that aren't necessarily as important as some of these things here. And I'm glad that you mentioned that the media jumped on the stories of the drones in Pakistan and all that, but it doesn't seem to me that, I don't remember seeing much of that.
Yeah,
But
I don't either.
you say that they did, and I'm glad, but they're not doing a lot of follow-up, it seems like.
Well, there was virtually nothing before that, and there was, from our point of view, a lot after that. And there was tension around the time of John Brennan's nomination, which activists were trying to block, and that got quite a bit of coverage on the news for that period of time, at least. And so, there was a big improvement and in awareness of drones and the number of articles that were being written about drones in newspapers. So when we did a search in 2011 or 2012, there was almost nothing that would come up, and now it's just thousands and thousands of articles.
And are they sanitized, or they talk about the collateral damage, or?
Well, a lot of the articles really do go ask the questions that should be asked. Ask about the privacy dilemmas, ask about, with the militarized zone drones, what is the support in international law. So there's a lot of, I think, probing questions about it, but there is not necessarily, that's not reflected in the people who are the decision makers engaging that dialogue with citizens. It's more the media's over here yapping and analyzing, and the activists are over here doing the same, and the industry is doing what it's doing, and it hasn't become part of the system in an integral way so that you can feel like the right things are happening.
I think that this might be a good time to, isn't it August when all of our congressmen and senators come back and do their town halls?
It should be.
I think it is. I think they take a whole month off. This might be a good time to be going to some of those and talking to them folks and bringing it up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And we will be inviting the full range of people to come. So we want to invite hobbyists, we want to invite the industry, we want to invite...
To this event.
Yes, so that we can get shed as much light as possible from all of these different angles and viewpoints that are involved.
Where is it again?
It's in the Elliott Chapel of the First Unitarian Church of Portland, which is in southwest 12th and
12th
Main.
and Salmon. Well, Maine.
And Maine's on one side.
Right, and Salmon's on the other. And the Elliott
Takes a whole
Chapel is
block.
more on Maine, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily crazy about Ron Wyden, but he's pretty good about internet issues and about some privacy issues. NSA. I don't know if he could fit it into his schedule, but there are some that might be interested in showing up, whether that be city council or the whole gamut between municipal, state, and federal, that might be interested in this, at least to send their aid to effect, because they're going to get an earful, I think, from all sides.
They should be interested. That's true, and we're definitely making our pitch to them.
Glad to hear that. So we haven't really had a signal, because this is going to be a brief, 15, 20 minutes, and I knew that we could go on and on and on. I wanted to squeeze Trudy in here, and we're going to bring her on, hopefully to Growing Concern sometime this month, or the first of next month. But have you noticed, and could you want to unhook maybe and go see if your guest showed up?
Okay. If you want, you can put the IPO thing up there.
Well, I was just thinking, I can continue the conversation. You
Sure.
can run out. You could just come back. You can just unplug it down here if you want.
Okay,
And
that'd be better than what I'm
because if she's out there, we should accommodate her to some degree. We've already covered this issue, and I've got a lot of notes here. Just as tangentially, we mentioned that event a few times, and we'll mention it again. But Ann Wright, who's a speaker, I've been taped her before, and she's a colonel. We didn't mention that. She's retired early because she didn't like what we did. Was it Iraq or Afghanistan?
It was when the Iraq War began in 2003.
Right.
She resigned.
Retired
in
early.
protest. Yeah.
Right, and and folks want to think back in your mind when there was some I think there were some ships that were leaving through Turkey with all kinds of food and stuffs and medications that were heading to Gaza, which was in the news again, and the Israelis stopped those ships, and they ended up killing some activists. I think a couple of them were Americans, and she was on that ship. And it just seems to me that she, even though she's talking about a different issue here, she has a lot of credibility in my mind.
She does. Yeah.
A lot of credibility because she's on the front lines, and she's working as best as she can to bring these issues that the United States, which, you know, I'm sure she loves her country as much as anybody that is for drones or for some of these issues that she's against, and we need to pay attention to the directions that our country is going in. And I think that this fact-finding, this is basically a town hall with some speakers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I hope that
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the notion is that it will be a moderated discussion between panelists. And so we made the decision to limit the panelists to brief remarks, that not more than 10 minutes, so that we can hear their expertise, hear them interact with one another.
that's always important, sure.
Ask questions of one another, hopefully, and the moderator will be asking his own questions and then facilitating the audience asking questions and getting some discussion going. So I think the whole point is to really have it be as interactive as possible.
It seems like you have some good dynamics. You got Ann Wright, who's putting herself out there, and you said you also had someone who can speak to the future of drone. That's a really important thing too. Now, who exactly is this fella? Do you know
His
much
name
about him?
is Peter Lumsdaine, and he speaks frequently on the future of robotics and knows a lot about the technology and is thinking through the implications of a robotics world. So he doesn't just limit it to drones. It's more the issue of using robotics to fight wars, using robotics for social control. So he will be asking us to think ahead to the future, what the implications are for us as humans and philosophically as we move more and more into robotics.
And we will. There's no doubt we will. I mean, you know, it sure wouldn't hurt a whole lot to slow this process down, you know, which is what these laws, I think, HB 2710 and the other laws have been meant to maybe slow this thing down so we can get a grip on it. Has there been any federal legislation? You said
Only the FAA, but that is mainly airspace, safety kinds of issues.
right, but that since they fly, that would be it would be in their precinct, you know, their area, mainly to deal with this. I would think, and hopefully they'll in the year, or what it could be a little over a year, but you said 2015 could be December. But hopefully they'll take it upon themselves and they'll deal with it. Has there been anything coming from them at all about where they're going with this?
Well, they have convened dialogues between lawmakers. So there's been some process kinds of things. I haven't seen any products. I don't think that will be
Not until it gets time.
shared until, yeah.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, I haven't heard from Richard yet. If the guest has showed up, I'm kind of curious because you know we're running out of space and time here. Maybe we'll get the word from him pretty soon. Going over my notes here. Oh, anti-drone tech. That to me is intrigued me. I hadn't thought about that. And so there are companies that are making big bucks off drones, and now there are also companies moving into short-circuiting them, so to speak.
Yeah, there was a recent story that a company, and I'm not recalling the name of it, but a company, I think it's in Oregon City, that developed this detection and neutralizing technology, and that they recently, there was an article in the paper about how they had received death threats. So it's interesting, you know, we think about militarized zones, you know, the war over there. In a way, you know, there's a war of ideas and technology and counter-technology going on. And one of the things that company mentioned was that when they first started publicizing that they were creating this detection and and defense technology, you could say, that they got a lot of interest from neighborhoods who wanted to protect their whole neighborhood. And so it's interesting, you know, just how are people thinking about this. So we're hoping that the public comes and tells us how they're thinking about this, and tells the panelists and asks the panelists to weigh in on what their concerns are.
Well, it reminds me of the little beeper people could carry on in their car.
Oh,
that-
yeah.
That said when there's
Buzzbuster.
radar being there's radar being thrown on them. You know, there could be something that could detect that current or whatever, as small as that
But
current
it couldn't
might be.
neutralize it.
No, just knowing they're there would be nice. You know, I don't know that. I'm not too concerned about it, but you know, for people that have an illegal pot garden in their backyard, to people that want to sunbathe, I mean, you know, without any clothes on, there's just so many things where we have our privacy, and these things could be an invasion, even if they're only flying over to going somewhere else.
Right.
Still, those rules have to be in place.
And that's a big issue, because there's really nothing in the current legislation that says what to do with the data that they may have captured inadvertently
Sure.
that can violate privacy.
Yeah, with today's hard drives and servers, you know, I mean, look what NSA can do. I mean, you know, they can collect this stuff for days and just log it at the speed of light, and who knows what they can come up with. And you know, sure, they're going to probably catch some lawbreakers, but at the same time, that's always these draconian processes will always, you know, find some crook somewhere, but you know, how much are we giving up? And I think that's a lot of what I think this event's all about, is trying to determine, you know, what's on this side of the page and what's on that side of the page. So we'll talk a little bit about that event. You just kind of go ahead and talk about it a little bit more, when it is and where it is. And
Okay. It's August 7th, which is a Thursday, and it will open at 6:30. The panel itself will start. There will be an introduction. Then the panelists will start around 7:15, and it will go to 9:30. We want to spend the bulk of the time with the panelists interacting, responding to the moderator's questions, and taking questions from the audience.
did I get the thumbs up that our guest is here? Camera person? He's listening to the other end there. I got the thumbs up, so do we have is our guest here?
He's out there.
Not written. Well, maybe we should, is there anything you want to fill in? We covered this very well. I mean, I'm glad that we got a chance
Well,
to talk.
yeah,
'Cause
thanks.
This was a much longer conversation than I knew, but I wanted to fit you in as it worked out. We've got a little bit of, we added and tripled the amount of time. We've talked about the event. We've talked about the different components of this, from privacy to war. I'm glad we started out with war, and we could go on to that, you know, a lot more. I realize that the reports that are coming over from over there. The one thing before we go, I was curious about on the war aspect of this is, you know, we know we can't believe what the government's putting out, and where are the other reports coming from, and how accurate are they?
Well,
How do we-
the
and
other reports have been primarily by journalists and human rights organizations and
Like
civilians.
Human Rights Watch and.
Yeah, and we met with a guy, his name was Noor Baram, and he is a photographer and journalist in Waziristan, and he's a amazingly courageous person. People all know him and know that he will document the scene, and he's the one who is recording all the names of the people who have died. The U.S. government isn't doing it, Pakistan's government isn't doing it, and that's the closest they have. So there's the thing called the Naming Project that is coordinated through the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, and it is that, you know, that's the best information that there is. It's on the ground information, and people call him and ask him to come to immediately to the scene of a drone strike
And talk to the family.
Yeah, and talk to the families. So
And if he's there that quick, I mean, I know that the Muslims don't they have to bury within 24 hours or something like that, or within a very short period of time. So he's there when the grieving is going on. So
yeah, and it's pretty horrifying, because the people talked to us and told us how they had to find the body parts of their loved ones that were hanging from the trees and scattered all over, and to try to put them together in caskets and give them a proper burial. So it was really very heartbreaking that regular people, if you picture it could happen, picture our own neighborhoods being struck by a drone, and the horror of that brings it home. If if you can imagine that and empathize.
Yeah, we talk about, we don't expect that Obama would do something like this, but he's done a few things, and whether it's the NSA or the more repatriations of undocumented workers by a magnitude of, I don't know what, 10 or 20 compared to George Bush. So he's done a lot of things that would has probably surprised folks that thought he was going to be the great what was it, Hope? Mm-hmm. I forget his.
Well, what I find even more disturbing than any particular individual in that position of power is how the sense of global war has become just entirely pervasive and endless. So it's not just that we're always in something that affects the entire globe, but that the war on terror has been defined as being an endless war. And so every place on earth is potentially a battlefield, anywhere where they can say, there are terrorists here. Whether that's proven or not, it's just, you just label them and point at them, and then they're targets to be assassinated. And then in retrospect or, post-assassination, then you define or the rationale for it in terms of, well, yeah, of course, they were terrorists. So that's the kind of labeling that has been going on that is not revealing the truth about who the people are who were actually killed. And part of the legal rationale that many Congress people have been trying to get exposed, the so-called drone memos that were written by the person who just became appointed as a justice, that they have redefined self-defense so that it doesn't even resemble anything that we think of as self-defense. So that none of our materials, none of our troops are in danger, and yet self-defense is defined in such a way that you can go across someone else's border and strike someone's home and say that that there were a Taliban or Al-Qaeda in that home, and that's called self-defense. So.
Okay, I guess we need to wrap it up. So we'll get to that right now. Thank you very much. We could go on with this. I had some other. we could go on because this is a very deep subject, and things that are pointing to the future are usually pretty deep, and that's what this one's all about. Well, Trudy, I thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Thanks for all the time.
And I hope thanks for being here during that time, because I know you hadn't planned on it. And maybe we can do this again before the event.
That would be great.
Thanks for tuning in.
Maybe bring in some of the other people.
Sure. We'll take a break and then we'll come back shortly.
Okay.
You are watching the Independent Producers Organization program. This program replays on these channels, at these times, and on these days. Write it down and tell your friends.
Thank you. Back with the Independent Producers Organization show. And we have two politicians here. What else can I
Would
say?
be politicians.
Would-be
Hopeful.
politicians. James Bugle has been here before, and Jason Yates, this is a new one for him. And somehow they got away with both my cards, but I remember Jason Yates. And also it's on his button, so that's all right too. I wanted you to talk about yourself first. By the way, there was an article in the paper the other day. I wanted to bring it. Let's see, on a newspaper size. It was about this big, and then your picture was in it.
Oh yeah, that's the one where the Oregonian called me a liar.
Okay, all right. Well, tell us about yourself first, and then tell us about that.
Okay, well,
Plug in your mic.
we are. I'm running for the 3rd District congressional seat currently held by Earl Blumenauer. I'm running as a Republican. I'm running because of Mark Twain's dictum that politicians are like diapers. You have to change them every once in a while for the same reason you got to change diapers. They get dirty. We have a culture in Portland that I think has become corrupt and incompetent, and there's no better illustration of that than them blowing $200 million on a bridge and not building 1 inch of it, or blowing $300 million on a healthcare website and not being able to get, you know, 1 person signed up through it, and nothing happens. You know, nothing happens in Oregon when we have these staggering abuses of public authority and staggering corruption. And it's just when you have a one party in power for decade after decade, eventually the government becomes totally dysfunctional, and that's what we have now. We have a government that's not getting anything done.
Okay, all right. But then a little bit more about yourself, or you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a lawyer. I've practiced a lot of different kinds of law. I appear in divorce court. I write contracts. I fight in federal court. I fight in state court, and I spend a lot of time fighting against the government.
Oh, okay.
And because I spend so much time fighting against the government, I generally get to see just about all the things they're worst at doing and screw up all the time. And I think it gives me a better understanding of, you know, what it means to write a law that doesn't get twisted around and screwed up. And I think I have a better understanding of the government than many people do, and a better understanding of how to fix it
Okay.
and what's gone wrong.
That's right. You have been totally involved in that. I think that's great. And I think you're doing great.
We're trying to spread the word.
All right. Okay, now, Jason Yates. Do you want to start from the beginning? I don't know if you want to talk about where you were born or anything like that, but you could kind of start in a little bit.
It's okay. I can tell you that I was originally born and raised just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in a little country town called Kingston, Georgia.
Okay.
A town of 400 people. So I grew up as a country boy. Fell in love with a girl from Yamhill, Oregon. Moved out here about 7.5 years ago, and have loved it here. Hope to raise my kids here. Got married about 7 years ago and have 2 sons, a 4-year-old and a 20-month-old. And last year, as I was looking at my boys play, I was wondering what's going to happen to them when they grow up. With the way that the government is going now, with all the regulations that are passed down, there's 3,000 new federal regulations that are approved every year. How many regulations are going to be on the book when my 2 boys grow up? And are they going to look me in the eye one day and say, Dad, why didn't you do anything about this? Why didn't you help me with my freedom? That's why I decided to run for Congress, after just seeing just how many things, just nitpicky things, are being put on us. I actually saw a new movie that came out, Dinesh D'Souza's America, was able to see that. And there was a person on there that said that without knowing it, most every American commits 3 felonies a day and doesn't know it.
Probably, okay. And that include traffic?
Everything. Could be anything, just because of all the different things that are thrown down.
Okay, all right. And then you're running for, again, against...
I'm running against Suzanne Bonamici in the 1st District, which is all of Yamhill, Washington, Clatsop, and Columbia County, and then a little sliver of Multnomah County in northwest Portland.
So you're up against her in this November
Yes.
election. Okay, all right. I don't know if I should get into the hot stuff, which is the question that he asked you for James. Has Obama done anything illegal? Is that?
Well, Obama has, depends on whether you think the buck stops at the top, okay? If we assume that Obama is responsible for everything that's going on, there's a lot of illegal stuff going on. And by that I mean that the primary duty of the president under the Constitution is to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And we have a system now in Congress that no longer is very functional for passing laws, and it passes these 1,000-page laws, and then certain pieces of them are sort of stupid, okay? And Obamacare is a prime example. And there are 3 or 4 different pieces of Obamacare which are right there in the law. You know, this must happen. You can't get a subsidy unless you buy something through this exchange. And even though the law is crystal clear, you know, the answer is, well, we don't care what the law is anymore. And there's a culture of lawlessness in this administration that is really unparalleled. And it's not just, you know, Obamacare, it's things like the IRS scandal. You know, here we are with them turning the IRS into an attack machine against their political opponents. And by that I mean, you know, there was some poor woman in Texas who tried to start an organization to fight vote fraud, and, you know, instantly the IRS is sicked on her, OSHA is sicked on her, you know, different federal, her life is just made a living hell. And then Congress comes in, and Congress is going to, you know, oh, we'll investigate what's going. And the IRS says, we don't have to give you any information. You know, they sit on it and then all of a sudden, oh, well, all the hard drives failed. Sorry, we don't have any emails anymore. We can't tell you what happened. You know, in the old days, before Congress turned into some little lap puppets, okay, and had real people in it who had like courage, if an administration official were to show up on Capitol Hill and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer your question, or I'm not going to tell you, or you can't have that, they would put the guy in the basement. And they had a jail in the basement and say, you're in contempt of Congress, and the sergeant at arms is going to take you downstairs, and when you give us what we ask for, we will let you out of the jail, okay? And now, what do? Oh, let's refer a citation for contempt to the Attorney General. And then we have more Obama lawlessness, because the statute says that when Congress refers a citation for contempt to the Attorney General has a duty to prosecute. And so I think it was like 6 months ago that they said, okay, this IRS person is in contempt of Congress because she's not giving us any information about all the wicked things she's been doing, and the Attorney General just sits on it illegally. You know, so is that Obama's fault personally? I don't know. But he has engendered a culture of corruption and lawlessness that is really unparalleled in modern history.
It's incredible. Who are they afraid that she'll vote for, just so that everyone's clear on it? They must be afraid that she's going to make a vote go.
Well, I'm not so sure. So in the case of the IRS thing, we know that the IRS commissioner visited the White House like something like 150 times, okay?
That's right.
And, you know, ordinarily the IRS commissioner should just be this person with the green eye shades, you know, collecting the money and handing. You know, they don't belong at the White House 150 times. Something was going on.
That's right.
And they are doing their damnedest to conceal what it was, and they're getting away with it because we have a bunch of lapdogs in Congress. And then, you know, who do we have from Portland? We have Earl Blumenauer, my opponent, okay? And so they hold a hearing and they bring in this guy who's the commissioner of the IRS who lied to them 2 months ago, and the Republicans say, you lied to us, and Earl Blumenauer's, oh, I'm so sorry you have to go through this, Mr. Commissioner. You know, I want to thank you for all your wonderful public service and how awful. I mean, you look at the two of them, it's like they should go get a room somewhere, you know?
Okay.
Because we no longer have, we have sort of gangster government where instead of standing up for law and process and the separation of powers and the things that should be done, it's just, well, he's from my party, so he could be, you know, like murdering babies, and that's okay with me. And that's just a sickening performance by a public official.
I remember that. That was
It was terrible.
really rough. Any comment on your end? Do you remember that happening?
Yeah, I remember that happening, and even with the emails, if the hard drive's been lost, if the emails have been lost, somebody received those emails.
Okay.
So you can't just lose emails. With the NSA spying on all of the Americans, with them spying on all the conservative groups, with them spying on the House and Senate, there's 2, 3, 4, 1,000, 10,000 copies of all of those emails.
Do you think all those emails are printed out?
I don't know if they're all
Every
printed
email.
out. I think they're probably just archived in a database,
Okay.
just to save
All right.
space.
Just wondering how much effort everybody is wasting or not wasting trying to get all that kind of thing together.
Well, I mean, it's all
Sorry.
wasted anyway. There's no reason that any surveillance should be done on an American without due process. It's in the Fourth Amendment. So the NSA by itself already is an unconstitutional entity and
Okay.
needs to be shut down because they don't have permission unless they have a court order.
That's right. That's right. It's that part has gotten out of hand. I totally agree with that. It's I don't know. It just when they testified, IRS, I felt that they really did something against the conservative entities. They really were doing something that was going to put a crimp on them. Absolutely. And I just think that I haven't heard back from them. I haven't heard back from the federal government with the truth.
Yeah.
We have corrected that. Nothing has
No,
happened.
not at all.
You're not going to hear the truth
won't
from
hear
the
it.
government.
And when Nixon tried to do that, okay, and the IRS commissioner said, no, I'm not going to do it, and went public, and Nixon got in trouble for it. You know, we're here,
Yeah.
we know what happened. The IRS commissioner was in there 150 times. Oh, who can we get next? What can we do for you, sir? You know, because they got no integrity left. Terrible.
That's right. Okay. See, IRS is. I wish I had a little more confidence in them, saying, "Okay, now they're doing the right thing," or "This is not happening," or "This is happening." It just doesn't seem like it's happening,
No.
and I don't know where to start.
Well, I mean, when
Something
you
like
when you
that.
look at the IRS, you have to realize that they put out a new tax code every year. Has taxes really changed from last year, from 10 years ago, or from 100 years ago? Tax everybody the same thing. Get rid of the IRS, just make it a flat tax. Everybody gets a postcard at the end of the year. You don't need the IRS, and you especially don't need them picking and choosing who they want to go after.
That's pretty much an uphill battle, probably, right? Trying to get that. I mean, I don't hear that much going for it or against it or whatever. So that would be something else. Well, anyway, maybe we could go into the border situation.
Yeah, terrible.
It is getting so many articles that I said, wait, this article says that a lot of these unattended, I'm trying to think of unattended immigrants, I think they use some word like that, are just simply being sent home. And I'm listening to Rush Limbaugh, and I'm thinking, this is the truth. And he says 1% might be sent home for show.
Oh yeah,
sure.
What's happening down there is an astounding collapse, and we can't really. They knew back in January that this was going to happen because you
Really?
can go on the federal procurement website, and back in January, Homeland Security was putting out bids for a contract to take care of 65,000 alien children. They have been putting out the message that they're not going to enforce the immigration laws for a long time, causing this massive groundswell of people coming in, and it's fantastically expensive. You know, here, what was he in Congress today or yesterday? He wants another $3 or $4 billion
that's just-
to just, and it's not like we have the money, okay? It's
right.
like we're already dead broke. We're already spending, $1.50 or whatever it is for every dollar we collect in taxes. Maybe it's down to $1.30 now. I don't know. But the point is we're dead broke, and he wants to go out and borrow another billions of dollars to, take care of these people and just house them at public expense and feed them and give them medical care. We got veterans who are dying right now because they can't get a VA hospital appointment,
right.
but we can have an infinite amount of money to treat anybody who walks across the border that Obama likes. It's just a shocking abdication of responsibility, and he ought to be held accountable for it, and it's one of the worst things he's done. And there's no reason on earth that they can't just take these people, come across the border. What country did you come from? We're flying a plane back there this afternoon.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it. And it would be about 100 times cheaper. You can buy them a first-class ticket back to Guatemala or Honduras or Belize or wherever it is, and it would be about 100 times cheaper than putting them into some system with government contractors taking care of them and moving them around and housing them out and treating their medical problems and all this stuff.
That's a
but we
problem.
don't do that. He has told the border people to stand down, and it has gotten so bad now that they've had to issue gag orders on the agents down there, because one of the agents said there's essentially no Border Patrol officers left patrolling the border anymore because they're all busy taking care of everybody.
That's right. That's incredible.
It's incredible.
They're going into the hospital also. The kids, and I'm trying to think of the word commandeering, but they're monopolizing some of that to get that care. And they come in, they have diseases and infections and serious stuff.
Yeah.
And we have the honor of
Right.
taking care of it.
Well, this
like that.
is the model of the model of the Democratic Party, and Nancy Pelosi was down there, and I think she was quoted as saying, "Well, we're just sort of part of one community. Like there's not really any border, okay?" And that is a recipe for the destruction of the United States. You know, to say that there's no difference between us and we don't need borders, you know, that's crazy talk. And yet here it is coming out of some of the highest-ranking members of Congress because we have a government that's generally gone insane.
Sometimes we just have to not pay attention to someone like Nancy Pelosi and Harry
Reid.
Harry Reid.
Yeah, what a gangster.
Have to ignore him.
Another thing with the border is there was a video released earlier today, an undercover video of where the illegal aliens were standing in line, and I'm not going to call them unattended immigrants. They are illegal aliens because if you're coming across the border and breaking our rules, you are illegal. I'm sorry.
Okay.
These illegal aliens are standing in line, and they're being asked what town would they like to go to in the United States.
Okay.
So this is not just a California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas issue.
Yeah.
This is now permeating through the United States. We don't have enough money to pay down our national debt. $17.5 trillion, and that's only on the surface. There's over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities, and we're supposed to come up with more money to pay for people who have not stood in line and have followed the laws to be able to get into this country legally. Until we can take care of ourselves, we can't take care of other people.
Well, it's even beyond that. Another one point on this, the immigration standpoint, we can't take so many people in here. We just can't take so many people. And they had some little short clip. It showed one fellow saying, well, here's all the gangs are out these different directions. That's okay, fine. Somebody's going to have to take care of it. Where are your parents? Where's officials? Where are people that will help you take care of the problems you're having here so you don't have to come up to our country and become illegal, like you say?
And this is also a Mexico problem because most of the people that are crossing our borders aren't coming from Mexico. They're coming from Central America and South America. So Mexico is partially to blame here because they're allowing these people to migrate through their country and cross our borders. And I actually heard on Lars Larson earlier today that one of the callers called in and proposed removing all federal aid to Mexico until they follow the rules and help us enforce our law at the border.
We don't want to know about aid to Mexico. It'll just ruin our day.
It's $4 billion a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just, well, anyway, the kids, they were talking about one of the talk show, Mark Levin, talking about how things were back in Eisenhower's day. They came across, they did this or that, sent them back. Repeatedly. They just kept sending them back.
Well,
Stayed on top of
and
it.
I know you disagree with me on this, Richard, but I believe there's a role for immigration and a role for people to come in, but it ought to be done like in the old days. And 100 years ago, if someone was going to come here, there would be an association that would sponsor them. And by God, if that person's not going on the public dole, if someone wants to bring their relative over here, they got to pay for them. And if they can't pay for them, they're going back. And instead of shoving it off on everybody else. And all the farmers and people who need seasonal workers, they come across the border, they do the work, they go back. Many people would be happy with that. They come here, they're missing their family, they're sending money back, and they'd be happy to come for the season and come back. Yet we have this horrible, broken immigration system that can't get anything done. And part of the reason we have so many problems with illegality is that we have a bureaucracy that is essentially totally dysfunctional. You can't call people up on the phone and get a decision made. You wait for years for this status or that status.
Yeah.
The basic bureaucratic engine has completely broken, as in so many other fields. New drugs, you want a new antibiotic? No, we can't do that anymore. We can't approve anything. We can't get anything done. And this total collapse in competence of the government is driving and is hidden behind many of these problems.
Well, that's right. One of the things is amnesty. I hear them talk, they keep reform. What's the word that goes with reform? Amnesty, reform, or something like that. That's the same as amnesty. That's what you're saying. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. They keep saying reform. Well, that means just changing something. No, it means they need to go back. And I know we can't seem to grasp the fact that the idea that there's 12 million illegal aliens here. And by the way, I am totally for them coming in as true American citizens. I'm totally for that. That's nothing wrong with that. And to a degree, I had no problem with them getting permission to come in and work in the fields or whatever. Yeah, make our money, take it back where they are. I'm okay with that. But that's enough.
I think what many people want is they want a government that can distinguish between the good people and the bad people. And the good people will work out, they're giving jobs to Americans, they're contributing, and we'll work out a way to get that straightened out. Maybe all the people who've been waiting in line should come first. But there's so many bad people, all the criminals and all the people who are just, unwilling or unable to work and who are sucking down massive amounts of public subsidies. This is something, it's not a sustainable thing. We are setting ourselves up for, essentially an economic collapse. And we're in the early stages of that now. We are seeing a government that is becoming more and more grasping and is reaching. And this whole structure that Jason talked about with the NSA and, having them have access and recording every financial transaction we make. We have a government that is grasping desperately for more and more and more resources because it's wasting so many of them.
Well, what about they trying to make them citizens, all to do with this reform, so that more people will vote for Obama and the Democrats?
That's the mindset. That's the mindset. That's the mindset. If we have people who are dependent on the government, they will support government. The Democrats are the party of government, and the problem is that there's a size beyond which, when government grows, it becomes like a cancer that kills the host. And we are now past that point. We are now at the point where there are almost more dependents than people who are carrying the load. And what happens is, it's like Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money.
That's right.
We can vote all these wonderful things, and then eventually the people who are making the money and providing the jobs, they say, I'm tired of getting kicked in the nuts, I'm retiring, I'm moving out of the country, I'm renouncing my American citizenship, something that's happening more and more, and the whole thing just collapses into this horrible mess. And that's where Obama is taking us faster than any other president in modern history.
It's what, the trillion figure, 7 trillion, or something like that he has added on to his debt, shall we say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's astounding.
Oh, right. And like this thing to do with Margaret Thatcher, it's just that. I always ask myself, what happens when the Democrats and all that run out of money right here in the United States? What will they do then? Where will they turn? Well,
The printing press.
or a tyrant. I thought they said a tyrant is what
Yeah.
had to come in after that to
Yeah.
get everybody straightened out.
Well, that's what you're referring, I think, to the founding fathers of this country. They didn't like democracy at all. They said that their study of world history showed that democracy always leads to loose fiscal controls, a public bankruptcy, and is followed by a dictatorship.
That's right.
And that's why they built in the Constitution this genius structure of government where that could not happen. And it's only because we have ripped the Constitution into shreds, every piece of it is in tatters, that these things are happening now.
Well, we want it the way it should be.
We'd like to go back to constitutional government. We'd like
Okay.
to go back to a
Right.
government under law where people are held accountable, and we don't have these shadowy, gigantic, rich people who, the economy will collapse unless you print $600 billion and give it to us. All these weird things that have been happening in the last 5 years. They are sinister. They are hallmarks of a banana republic.
They're like borrowing money from the communists.
We're doing that too. Yeah.
No, with the Constitution, when you become a congressman, a senator, president of the United States, you swear an oath to the Constitution of the
That's
United
right.
States. You don't swear an oath to the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Pacific Green Party, the Independent Party, none of those. You're swearing an oath to the Constitution.
Right.
Nothing else. There are very few things in the Constitution that the federal government is allowed to do. And like James has said, they are reaching, grabbing, snatching, stealing everything that they can. That's why we're running. We're hoping to go in there and not necessarily pass laws,
Okay.
but to go in and release regulations. Do like the state of Minnesota did, where the state representatives in Minnesota met up for something that is affectionately now being called the unsession, where they went in and they overturned 1,700 state law and regulations.
Were these ones that were
Outdated,
against-
obsolete, contradicted each other, were doubled up, voted on 2 or 3 or 4 times. So they're clearing their books out in Minnesota.
Okay.
Why can't we do that in Washington, D.C.? Why can't we do that down in Salem? Why can't we go back to what James said, a constitutional America, where we actually read the Constitution? Oh, here's the Constitution. Here's the things we can do. Oh, we can't do those things that we were doing before. I guess we're going to have to stop and let the states do that, which is
Yeah.
outlined in the 9th and the 10th Amendments. 99% of the things that are voted on in D.C. are state issues, and the states
And
need
the
to be
state
allowed
should
to.
be doing it all, taking care of it.
That's why we're called the United States of America. We're not America of the states.
Okay.
We've reversed our own country name at this point. Once we get back to where the states are in charge and then the federal government handles very little of what's going on, that's when people are going to prosper. That's when they're going to gain their life, their liberty, and their pursuit of happiness back.
Okay.
Because once the states get to decide what goes on, you're going to have more local control. You'll be able to vote on these social issues. And then the federal budget, interstate commerce, and the Department of Defense, those are pretty much really the only 3 things the federal government can do.
That's right. The highways, you said.
The highways, because they go across states, so of course,
That's right.
that's a federal issue. National budget, that covers all 50 states, or 57 as Obama likes to say. That's a federal issue.
Okay.
And then Department of Defense, of course, we want to defend our 50 states. That's a national issue. Other than that, let the states have their rights back.
Okay.
And the people.
And the people.
I'm totally for that. I think perfect example was the Leave No Child Behind. You know what's funny? It started right here for us. It started right here, Multnomah County. We had a chance to vote for Multnomah County to take care of the education of the children. Well, somehow that got away to the state. And then it got into the state, and along comes this let no child be left behind. Why couldn't the states just have handled all that education?
I think it's dangerous to even let the states get involved, you know? I mean, you got to look at where we came from here. I mean, and the financing of it. I mean, think about this, you know? Think about 10 families around the block, and they each chip in $5,000, and they hire some bright young teacher for $50,000 a year, and they find a room and they hold the school, okay? And during that period in American history, okay, we had works like Moby Dick, you know, and these works that no one can read now because the vocabulary is too high. We had fantastic literacy, you know. And now, where are we now? Well, we got 30 kids in the class, and we're spending about $20,000 apiece. Now we got $600,000. We've got a teacher. We've got an assistant teacher, we've got an administrative assistant, we've got an assistant to the administrator, we've got administrators, we've got Multnomah County Service Districts, we've got diversity coordinators and training staff. And somehow, and the poor teacher is sitting here, and now she has to talk to 15 bosses, and she has to spend half of her time filling out paperwork, and then there's the federal paperwork, and the kids, you know, what is Multnomah County graduating now? Like 2/3 of the students, only 2/3 of the students are graduating on time? I mean, what is up with that? You know, they're running these schools, and they've got 8 periods in the school, and the students are actually only going to like 4 or 5 a day for some weird reason. And everything about this institution is rotten and corrupt and stupid to the core. And the answer of the establishment is, oh, well, you should support the teachers. Yeah, okay, we support the teachers. We don't support these 50,000 other parasites that are getting in the way of the teachers and screwing up the mission of educating the children. And every layer we add on top outside that school building, every single layer is a step backwards.
Okay.
Because if you look at it, just a general point, there's 4 levels of bureaucracy. There's the Federal Department of Education, State Department of Education, local school board, and then the principal at each individual school.
You're missing a couple. There's actually even more. But go on. Yeah, you're simplifying.
Yeah, very, very simple.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you really need 4 layers of bureaucracy in anything? Is it possible for the principal to make educated decision based on what they know about the children and the teachers in their school? Okay, now let's take the next step out. The school board, you know, county area, district area, whatever grouping you want to say. Can they make educated decisions based on the kids in their area? Yes, not as much because they don't know individual issues. They don't know townships, educational work issues that are going on. Now let's go to the state. Does the state know really what's going on in each school district or each county? No. Then you get to the federal part. You got a handful of bureaucrats, well, a couple of hundred handfuls of bureaucrats that think they know what is best by developing a common core system that every kid in the United States has to be a cookie cutter student of the lowest possible standard to pass by. This is going to be great for our students because all of them are going to graduate the same. I don't want my kids graduating a program called Common Core.
Yeah.
I want my child to be super. I want my children to be able to have a super education. So I am in support of abolishing the Federal Department of Education and the State Department of Education and reverting all of the money that is collected from your property taxes at a county level to be decided county level wise where that money is going to go to, and letting the parents choose what school they want their child to go to. Because then if you have the money following the children, the schools are going to have to compete for the students.
That's
because when you go to college, do you just go to the local college that you happen to live nearby? No. The kids pick and choose where they want to go to college based on reputation, sports teams, a particular professor, things that are going on. Why can't we do that with high school? Why can't we let parents decide what their children learn up until they're 18? Because the parents are in charge of the children until they're an adult.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible mess. It's all terrible, terrible messes, and so many of these messes are engineered from Washington, D.C., with the government mucking around things it's not supposed to. You know, and you ever heard the expression "a jack of all trades and master of none"?
Oh yes.
Right,
Yes.
and so you know, you think about the government's supposed to be in charge of national defense, and yet somehow we can't even secure a border. You know,
That's
we
right.
can't launch a military satellite anymore without buying an engine from the Russians. And so if the Russians decide to act like Nazis and send stormtroops into eastern Ukraine and foment some rebellion, we can't disapprove of that, because then we couldn't have our military set. I mean, that function has rotted, because at the same time we've got an army of people paying attention to stuff they're not supposed to be paying attention to. And Congress, you know, Jason and I go to Congress, we're going to find that that institution is completely screwed up too, because it used to be you'd come in and there'd be a problem, okay? There'd be a problem with something that Congress was supposed to do something about, and there'd be a hearing on it, and there'd be a law, and there'd be a bill, okay? Now we have this gangster control of Congress with Harry Reid as the chief gangster, and nothing gets to move legislation-wise unless we staple together 9 pieces of foul-smelling crap and put one little piece that might make some sense on it. Now we've got a 1,000-page bill, and it's going to be, okay, all the red team is going to vote for this, and all the blue team is going to vote against it, or all the blue team is going to vote for it, and the red team is going to vote against it, instead of addressing any problem in a rational way. And that's how we get Obamacare, and that's how we get comprehensive banking regulation, and that's what they want to do with immigration reform. And we have to send people to Congress who are just willing to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that stuff. We're going to do things in an intelligent manner, or we're not going to do them at all. And I know what happens then, okay? We know what happens then, right? The government shuts down, okay? Because we had that like last year. You know, here we are, and we've got a budget for the entire government, and it all has to be in one bill. You know, so you have to take the big stinking heap, or you're the bad guy who wants to shut the government down. And then the worst part is we have all these liars in the media, you know, because here the Republicans pass out this bill, and they say, we'll fund everything in the world except implementation of Obamacare, which we know to fail, right? So here's the bill. And the Senate won't move on it, the President won't move on it, yet, oh, it's those congressional Republicans, you know, they shut down the whole government because they tried to stop the government from making a stupid mistake, you know. People have got to wake up and see what's really going on and understand how rotten the processes are. Because until they understand how rotten the processes are, they're not going to really know who to blame. And they sure can't trust anybody who's telling them that in the media. It's a terrible situation. It's a terrible situation, and it's getting worse.
And the government shutdown was the final straw for me that made me decide to run for Congress, because I went to listen to Suzanne Bonamici at the Yamhill Town Hall meeting last year. And she got up, and the first thing she said was, during the government shutdown, it cost the American government $19 billion. Then the next thing she said was, you know what, we signed the clean resolution and got the government going again. Well, I talked to her afterwards, and I'm like, you know, the clean resolution added $1/3 of $1 trillion to the national debt, and you approved it? You voted for that? So I think it was more damaging you opening the government back up than leaving it closed. And that's sad when you actually say that it's better that nobody work in Washington than for them to open back up and cause even more debt. Because that was not a clean resolution, and that was the final straw for me.
No, they're like the terrorists with the grenade. You know, you fund all the stupid stuff we want, or we're shutting the government down, and we'll blame you. And we think the American people are stupid enough that we can get away with that. And it's very sad.
Wait,
because
you're talking about the Democrats, aren't you?
yeah.
Okay.
And we and it's. But the sad part is when you're dealing with a bunch of terrorists like that, you know, you can either keep giving in and the country can go further and further off the tracks, or eventually you're going to get a crowd in there that says, we're not going along with that. You know, we're not going to do that anymore. You know, we've got a bill here, it funds all the parts of the government that need funding. You know, if you want, you know, we're not going to destroy the country even if you threaten to turn off the iron lungs in the hospital. We're going to make sure that everybody knows, here's the money for the iron lungs in the hospital, and you guys voted no.
Okay, I wanted to backtrack just a bit. About the teachers, I understand many cases of teachers making essentially a liberal presentation to their students. Is that, do you hear about that?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, all the time. There's a picture of somebody in the city of Portland teaching that, you know, there's a basic human right to food, or there's a basic human right to health care.
Where do they get that idea?
Well, it's the idea that
You didn't see the memo?
everybody wants something for nothing, everybody thinks that what they need or want is something that someone else should have to do for them. It's the mindset of the little child, you know, and what they don't understand is a prosperous and healthy society can afford a lot of charity, it can afford a lot of benefits, but there comes a point where when you start pointing the gun at people and say, you have to give me this, you have to give me that, the system collapses. And we are seeing greater and greater shortages of doctors now because doctors are, I'm not going to be your slave, you know, I'll retire. And then the young doctors look at this and say, why should I stay up 90 hours a week doing residencies and suffering through what is really a living hell, if you've ever known anybody who's gone through medical school, so that I can be the slave of the state and make, you know, 30% more than a car mechanic or whatever, you know. And it's this whole mindset of something for nothing, you know. And the beautiful part about the Constitution, as Jason was saying, is we had a system where, you know, the individual states, if we had some states that went down that path, they didn't have to drag down the whole thing. But the federal government could never drag down the whole thing because the federal government could never do something that stupid everywhere. And so if California wants to commit suicide, okay, people can move to Texas. But now, with the collapse of the Constitution, we are seeing the entire nation committing suicide.
That's right. Yep.
And with what was said about the doctors and the teachers, I have a doctor and a family, a doctor and a teacher in my family. My brother-in-law is finishing up his residency down in California because he couldn't get a residency here in Oregon. Okay. And he's doing, like James said, he's working 90 hours a week, which means he's not able to see his 3 kids because he's got to do this for his job so he can take Obamacare and help people for $3 an hour. You know, he doesn't want to do that, but he's so far into it now. He's a year away. He's going to finish it out so he can do that. My mother-in-law is a teacher in McMinnville, and she just retired this year after 27 years because Common Core was about to kick in this fall, and she didn't want to have to go through an entire new learning curve to be able to learn a new way to teach, even though for 27 years, all of her kids have loved the way she's taught, have gone on to be successful in high school and in college and having jobs and helping the community, and now going to the substandard education system. She didn't want any part of that, so she left after 27 years when it was her goal to be able to hit 30 years and retire.
Who can explain Common Core so that people can have a better idea of what it is? It just kind of keeps getting referred to all the time.
Well, it depends on how far you want to go back. I mean, it's like Jason said, Common Core is the idea that we all have to learn everything the same and everything the same way. You know, we can't have any diversity in thought. You know, liberals are all for diversity in everything except thought, because if you think too much, you realize that they're crazy, okay? So what we got is we got this cadre of bureaucrats back in D.C. who have come up with some of the dumbest stuff that anyone has ever seen, okay? There are 2 schools of thought on this. One is that they're just incompetent, and the other is that they're actually trying to invent teaching standards and methods to destroy the United States. And by this, I mean that it's most obvious in the math area. There are, if you go on the internet and you type in Common Core math worksheet or something, you will see these worksheets where they're essentially telling children that they can't just, you know, add it up. They have to make up stories in particular ways, and that if they get an answer that's close, well, that's just as good. And then on
as
the
long as they explain themselves,
as long as
how
they
got there.
explain themselves, even if it's wrong, and the people, the future engineers, the people who are going to keep us alive by making machines and innovations and chemical engineers and patents. These people who can look at a number and go, yeah, 21 and 21 is 42 or whatever, these people are all attacked by this and told that they are stupid and that they can't learn. And it discourages the mathematically gifted, and it rewards or provides some sop to the mathematically incompetent. So you have that whole thing of destroying science and math. And then on the social science side, the whole thing is a bunch of essentially unconstitutional drivel. You know, there are worksheets out there on the internet. The president's job is to make sure the laws are fair. You know, really? Really? You know, he's allowed to just pick and choose the laws that he likes and doesn't. Well, this law is fair, I'll do it. This law is not fair, I won't. That's utterly inconsistent with the idea of the Constitution, and it's also a primitive idea that's a regression to some sort of monarchy thing. And the whole genius of the American system is that we had a Constitution, and the Constitution required the officials to act under law, and the law was higher than the officials. It's like Jason said, they swear the allegiance to the Constitution, and replacing it with the notion that, well, we'll just pick the right guy and he'll make sure everything's fair. That's what came before America. It's not a step forward. It's not progressive. It is a form of deterioration and decay back to tyrants and despotism. It's just stupid, and it's evil, and it's progressing like cancer.
Okay, in other words, still, that's what some teachers are saying. There's got to be some conservative teachers out there.
No, there's plenty of them.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't have a choice now. They have to be teaching Common Core. They have to learn that teaching style. Because like James said, there's no room for thought or, hey, let's try to learn this way and see if this works. There's no room for experimentation anymore. It's this way or get out of my classroom.
Yeah.
And if we do that, imagine how many kids are going to be dropping out, because if they don't understand, the teacher's already moved on and can't go back because they've got this block that they have to teach now. It's just going to ruin our children. There's nothing special about this education now, and I'm scared to death of how my children are going to turn out at graduation. And I'm this close to homeschooling them.
Right. You got to fight, obviously.
And it's sad that as a taxpayer, I have to fight for my kids' education. I'm the boss. I'm the one paying the taxes. I get to decide how my kids are taught. And if I don't like it, then I'll teach my kids myself, and I'll teach them the right way. Because I've finished college. I can get my way through there, probably better than any Common Core sheet that anybody has put together in D.C.
Okay, well, I've got a little better idea. Because it does seem like a real drag having to fight the whole thing.
Well, and this goes way back. You know, this is only sort of the capstone of decades of subversion of our educational processes. You know, there's a fascinating story which you can read about how the Army tests the recruits coming in, and the Army gives them a reading test, okay? Sometime in the 1950s, the Army noticed that its recruits had suffered a staggeringly significant drop in reading ability, okay? And this eventually percolated up, and they discovered that it was associated with the educational fad of sort of, I can't remember, it's like whole word reading versus sounding it out or whatever. And the Army said, what are you people doing? And everybody shouted them down, you're the Army, we're the educators, and it never changed. To this day, you will find companies like Hooked on Phonics that exist because the educational system took a wrong turn on reading education. Then, during the 1960s, it was the new math. You can Google, you know, Tom Lehrer, new math. There's a song about a comic song about this, that they began, instead of teaching the children, just the reading, writing, and arithmetic, the arithmetic part, no, we're going to teach people to, count in base 2, and base 2 is just like base 10 if you have only 2 fingers, and all this stuff that was utterly unnecessary for the children and confused them and interfered with their performance. And that's why we have all the corporations now designing cash registers and whatever, because the students graduating today can't even make change because of the new math. And so now, we destroyed the reading, destroyed the math. Now the Common Core is sort of the capstone of the achievement where we seize centralized control over everything and really begin to rip it apart in a hurry. It is obscene. It is a terrible thing.
I loved that story about young boy. He's been working on his iPad or whatever, and his grandmother was there, and she had to add up these figures in order to know to do something or other, buy something or whatever. And she added up the figures, and the boy said, "How did you do that?"
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a joke.
I love that.
There's a joke out there that in the 30s, the test is, you buy a load of logs. The Oregon math test is you buy a load of logs for $100. You take them to the mill. the mill charges, you know, the 10% processing charge. You know, you sell the processed things for so and so. What's your profit? You know. You get to the 1950s and it's simpler. You get to the 1960s or the 1990s or 1980s and it's a logger, you know, cuts down a bunch of trees in the forest. You know, how does the forest feel about that? You know, is it right for him to make money off of this? It's you can see this. I mean, my kids went to public school in Oregon up until, you know, middle of high school. And I saw these, you know, they'd have a math book, and in this math book would be this little 5-page colored section on, oh, how to be an environmentalist in the middle of the math book. I mean, you know, there's a war out there for the control of textbooks. You know, they say the hand that rocks the cradle, you know, rules the world. And I think that enemies of America and enemies of everything we stand for have seized control of the educational system, and they're rocking this cradle in a way that is disadvantaging our children in a shameful, shameful way. I think that poor education is the greatest civil rights issue of our time. You know, the black community in this city ought to be up in arms about the poor quality of services by the Portland Public Schools. And yet they're complacent. And yet they keep voting for the same people over and over again who've made this mess, and it's crippling the future of their children.
That'd be true with all of them. Of course, that's. I'm glad that there's somebody out there that's trying to do it. And your thoughts on the.
Well, I don't know if there's much more that can be added.
Okay, that's fine.
This has been pretty well covered. It's in shambles. It needs to be fixed.
Okay.
And Portland can now know that they have two people willing to go and fight for their children to help them have a better future so that they can get quality jobs, so they can help the community, they can help keep Portland vibrant, they can bring new companies here, they can be quality employees. Because what we're looking at right now, we're looking at a substandard workforce that's coming up that's going to be nationwide. And unless somebody does something now, we're not going to be a superpower much longer.
That's right. That's one of the problems. That's the one thing I think we should always have. Control of the sky and all powerful. We're the ones that spread democracy.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's shameful that,
Who could
we've
want
lost
that?
this. It's shameful that we've lost the space program. You know, when Jason and I would like to go to Congress and you know, but we want the people of Portland to understand that sometimes if you're for the children, it doesn't mean that you're going to have 5 new federal laws about education. It means you're going to get the federal government out of the way, and you're going to focus on the federal government thing, and you're going to have to trust them and their state representatives to fix the thing that they've left behind, that we've left behind, so we can fix the really things that need fixing, like national defense and all. You know, it is insane for us to sit here and just do nothing in space. You know, we should have. We have sort of almost an anti-technological administration now. We have an administration, you know, that once upon a time it was like, let's go to the moon, and now it's like, let's build toy trains. Let's put trains all over that have the same speed as trains in the 1890s. I mean, what on earth? You know, this is the 21st century, okay? Google and Mercedes-Benz and 10 other companies can make self-driving cars. You know, if we want to have public transportation, how about a self-driving network of electric buses where you can pick up your telephone and press a button on it and summon the bus that has an optimized path that goes through the whole city? And instead, oh no, let's build trains. You know, I mean, the things that we're doing are so staggeringly stupid because people stand up and say, oh, we're going to do this, you know, and it's easy to say, okay, this person's going to do something. We're going to build a windmill. We're going to build a train. And you see that there's something that got done. And what you don't see is when you took all those billions and billions of dollars to build these stupid things, you prevented other much smarter things from being built. And it's the greatest tragedy of our generation, and it's in every field, is we have misallocated the capital of the nation because we've let the government allocate it.
you know, you're right about the trains. John Charles, who's been here, Cascade policy. Really studied about the trains, and he just doesn't know how that we can ever come out. I can ever come out with the amount of money it takes and the things that keep going wrong with it.
Giant public sinkhole of funds.
I know
It has only one purpose: to make the crooks rich. The crooks who own the property along the line, and the crooks who skim off the money that comes through. You know, the whole model is, let's go out and borrow $5 billion and we'll get our fingernails into about 1% of it, and the rest of you can spend the next 30 years paying it back. And that's a model that they work over and over again.
Never occurred to me about people getting, what do you call it, byway fees or something like that, because they're on private property or have bought it or have gotten the agreement to build on it. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about the two things. One is that they pay a lot of money directly to the people along the line in the construction process, and then because they have put all this capital investment and they have these rail cars going through, they have provided a comparative advantage to those people. They have made those people richer. You're a coffee shop, and if your coffee shop is suddenly next to a big train station, you're going to make more money, okay? But on balance, the process, the cost to society of concentrating all that, guns were pointed all over, collecting money from other people and other coffee shop owners who didn't get anything. And on balance, we are much, much worse off.
You know, I look at the one going to Milwaukee, Clackamas County. They were totally involved. They had to be involved to the point that they were putting in money too, or something like that. And going through southeast Portland, I just can't, like a war zone when they were building that. They just took out everything. Perfectly good businesses. Make it move, get out of here. We just have to keep coming through. To me, that particular stretch going to Clackamas County just seems like a horrendous mistake, and there isn't anything you can do about it. They need to, they felt they needed to keep going on it, but that was just a terrible expense.
And like James said, that this is an absolute sinkhole of money. Every time someone steps on the Portland Metro, the city loses at least 65 cents for every person that steps on one of the buses. Where is that money coming from?
That's right.
That money is coming from the
payroll
residents.
tax.
That,
or
the
something.
upkeep,
Yeah.
and is this really helping the community? No. Now, is all mass transportation bad? No. It's just the way that Portland Metro has set this up, how much money they have wasted on this. It is destroying Portland.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, Portland, you now have two friends that are willing to go to Congress to help you.
I'm glad you said that, because I know we've got about, 3 or 4 minutes, and I do want you to sum up and go over who your opponent is, and we're looking for you in the next election in November. So go ahead with your opponent and what you, just a summary of what you're...
Okay. My opponent, Suzanne Bonamici, former Oregon House, Oregon Senate member, ran in 2010 for the special election to fill the spot of David Wu, who had to resign because of the scandals he had. Her husband, Mr. Simon, was his attorney, and then she ends up winning the special election. A couple of coincidences there, but that's okay. She's just now finishing her first full term on her own right, and has never seen a tax she didn't like.
Oh yeah,
I know
I've heard
of it.
that.
I have, through looking at her voting record, I have seen at least 17 taxes that she has voted for, and I've never seen one that she has voted against.
Okay, all right.
Is that someone that you need in Washington, D.C.?
Okay.
Do you need someone that every time they show up, you may have to pay more? Or would you rather have someone to go in and help return some of that money to you so you can keep it, so that you can decide what you want to do with it? Do you want to go to the store and get a new pair of sneakers for your kid? Do you want to be able to add on an addition to your home? You should have that right, but you can't have that right if you don't have the money.
Okay.
So I am running to help return the freedoms back to the people of Portland and northwestern Oregon.
Okay.
And I have a 4-point plan that's going to make that possible. And I'll
Okay.
be really quick. Repeal Obamacare and replace it with free market health care. Let all 50 states fight for your business. That's going to drive your health care prices down.
That's right.
Number 2, the $17.5 trillion budget deficit. Let's propose a constitutional amendment that says a fair and balanced budget has to be passed each year before any other bill can be spoken of on the floor of the House or the Senate. This means both parties are going to have to work together to fit their bills in that budget, or it's not passing that year.
Okay.
Number 3, 53% of Oregon is owned by the federal government, which
Yeah.
means Oregon's not even living up to half of its potential.
Okay.
Let's follow the rules that's on the book and give all of that land back to each respective state and let the state governments decide what they want to do with that.
Yeah.
And then number
Okay.
4, let's create or recreate the jobs that have been lost by people in Congress and people in the Senate and the people in the White House.
Okay.
So I'm Jason Yates. You can look me up
Okay.
at www.yatesforcongress.com.
Can you do it in about 40 seconds?
40 seconds. My opponent's chief goal in life is to raise taxes and increase the size of the government class. My chief goal will be to lower the size of the government class and to remove its restrictions, because we don't have jobs because government is kicking the crap out of employers 50 different ways. We have got to support people who hire people instead of making them the enemy. And until we do that, there aren't going to be enough jobs and the economy is going to continue to slide. And you do that by shrinking and controlling government. That is the root of our problems. That's what we need to fix.
I want to thank everybody for watching, and I want to especially thank our crew for making this show possible. I really appreciate our crew coming in and helping with everything they do, camera, the control room, the whole thing. So, and I want to thank them, and of course I want to thank our 2 guests who have made it clear what they want. They want to be at the election.